Welcome to Reclaiming Thinking, hosted by Team Metacognition. We talk with innovative educators and leaders, finding creative ways to develop the kind of thinking needed to solve the problems of the future. Each episode will leave you with practical strategies and, we hope, some inspiration you can use today. We're happy you're here.
Hello, team. I'm Dr. Allison Navas here with Dr. Jillian Connery, and welcome to our inaugural episode of the Metacognition Show. This is a really special episode for us because it's also releasing on Team Metacognition's first birthday. So thank all of you so much for being with us. This has been an endeavor of love to build a space in a complex profession and a complex world that we live in that can be uplifting and sharing strategies and best practices. So we're thrilled you're here. The purpose of this episode is to also get to know each other, tell you a little bit about ourselves, about what motivated us to start this project, and introduce some of the things we have coming up. So thank you so much for being here. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'll let Dr. Jillian talk about herself. So most of y'all know me from being in international baccalaureate community schools together. So I'm originally from Texas in the south of the United States. I've been living in Lima, Peru for 10 years. I teach theory of knowledge, and I've taught lots of different classes in the humanities. So really enjoying this journey. And personally, I came on the concept of metacognition, well, really before I knew what metacognition was or I had a name for it. And Dr. Jillian will talk about how we met together, but we were at Texas A&M University in Texas in the United States. And the first year, I almost failed my history class. And that's a little crazy because one of the things I teach is history, but I didn't have study skills. I didn't have systems to see if what I was doing was working. Obviously, it wasn't working, but I was fortunate that my university had a program where it was basically like a tutoring service done by a student who had already gone through. It was called supplemental instruction, and they basically gave us study skills and introduced us to metacognition. And for me, wow, that was just a whole new world. And so I went on to research that in my doc in Ed Psych, and fast forward and here we are. So I will pass the proverbial mic over to Dr. Jillian to introduce herself.
Howdy, y'all. I am Dr. Jillian Connery from Dallas, Texas, and I have been an educator for 19 years, and I'm excited to be with you here today. I've spent the bulk of my career in K-12 public schools, but I've also taught at the university level and done a lot of consulting work with different educational organizations. I've worked and presented both locally and abroad, and I just love teaching all ages, but especially adults. It's just so fun to be helping teachers teach students. So I also found that typical study strategies didn't necessarily work for me. When I was in college, I felt more comfortable just doing whatever worked for me, and I wasn't really worried about whether it was right or wrong. It just whatever was going to help me do the best I could in classes. And now, the more I learn about metacognition and psychology, the more I realize, oh, I had some actual issues going on that now have labels, but at the time did not. And so, any way I can help people realize there are different strategies that you can use to help you, I get excited about it because I wish I had had a community to help me do that back in the day.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Jillian. We have to tell them about the handstand story. So fun story community. Dr. Jillian and I actually met like 25 years ago, our first year in university. And I have this very vivid memory. My psychology friends will call it a flashbulb memory, where I walked into our dorm room and Jillian was in a handstand, but she was studying her facts. What was it, like bio, anatomy? I don't remember.
I remember it was US history.
Okay. Oh, there we go. So history is what prompts everyone to get into metacognition. So why the handstand? Tell the community.
So I've often struggled with sleep issues, which I now know, in my 40s, that it's sensory overload. But at the time, we just thought it was some kind of sleep disorder. And so I would fall asleep. I fell asleep in every standardized test I ever took. I still did really well. And now I'm like, wow, I wonder what would have happened if I had realized, what was going on. But when I was studying, I would often start falling asleep. And I realized if I did things like exercise or stretch while I was studying, I kept my blood flowing and it kept me awake. But the best one of all was the headstand or the handstand because, and I would literally put my notes and I would just read it upside down and I would talk about it, like just reading my notes out loud. Like the more I spoke out loud and did something physically active with my body, the more I stayed awake and engaged and not distracted or asleep.
Okay, so like I'm already thinking we have to take a picture of you doing a headstand before like we drop this episode. That's going to be epic. So let me just say, because we actually up to this point haven't really shared a lot of like what metacognition really is. So some people are like, oh, it's reflection, and it definitely has components of reflection. And just like a mini summary, and we'll drop something on the website about this. But in the literature, it's under the umbrella of the field called self-regulated learning. Right. So it's underneath. So metacognition is part of how we regulate, and it includes the emotional components. Self-regulated learning includes the emotional components, but metacognition specifically is, and I'm going to read from my notes here, in Zimmerman 2002, refers to students' awareness and understanding of their own thinking. And it includes three core processes. So planning, how to approach a task, monitoring progress while working, and evaluating the outcomes once the task is complete. So I think a lot of times we see students, and I don't know, maybe kind of there's some parallels in what we're sharing in our own journey as students, that like you might have a plan or you might be doing some trial and error, but the monitoring and the evaluating phases are not happening. Maybe it's a little bit haphazard. And so that's also something we want to share about. So before we move on and talk a little bit more, I wanted to share my favorite way to encourage the monitoring of thought processes are the Harvard visible thinking routines. So we're going to put the link in the show notes for you. I'm going to just talk about one. Oh my goodness, y'all, there are a million. And because Dr. Jillian's background is in language instruction and I work in an international school, and I know a lot of y'all work in international schools too, we're all language teachers, right? So anytime we can give a structured tool, a sentence stem, frames, anything that helps the students have the language to plan, monitor, and evaluate, we love that, right? So the classic to me is I used to think, now I think, right? So I used to think that study skills were something that you either had or didn't have. And now I think they can be taught. And that's very exciting, right? And that's a whole field of metacognition, right? So that I used to think, now I think is really powerful for students in the monitoring and evaluating phase. So every episode, we're going to be sure you have something that you can take and use right away in your classroom. So we definitely, or in your school buildings if you're an administrator. So we want to be sure that you always have that as well. So that is actually the main component of what we wanted to share with you on this first episode. So I don't know if Dr. Jillian wants to share anything else before we continue.
Well, yes, I do. I want to do our rapid fire question round, which we will end every episode with. So, Dr. Allison, are you ready for our questions?
Let me stretch. Oh. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, first up, we have a series on our socials called Word of the Week. It can be any word you love in any language. So tell me, what word would you share?
Oh my gosh, Dr. Jillian. Well, for the inaugural, it has to be metacognition. So being team metacognition that we are, that's the word for me, because it just is so powerful once we start teaching it explicitly. And I think that's kind of the key thing. We always teach fractions with a procedure and a routine, and it's able to be spiraled because it's visible, it's written, there's cues. But we don't tend to do that. Well, lots of people do now. But that's something that's our mission, is to make that easier for you and give you systems and strategies for that. So metacognition is the word of the week.
Metacognition. Great. Number 2, what is that teacher song for you? Something that gets you hyped up to go and teach and turns your mood around if you're having a rough day.
Well, Dr. Jillian and I also are friends outside of work, as you know, and we really like to ski. And so we torture our two children who are close in age by making them do dance parties to Whitney Houston's I Want to Dance with Somebody. So, I want to dance. So that is definitely our song. Anytime we're like, got to get hyped up and want our teenagers to be like, Mom, you're so cringe, that is the song for us.
Number 3, what is the book you most like to reread and why?
Ooh, that's a tough one because, as educators, we love our books. But I think the one that I find myself coming back to, and we've shared about it on our socials as well, is James Clear's Atomic Habits. I love a procedure, as you whilst know, right, from this conversation. But the way he and it makes very clear how you can do things like habit stacking, to if you want to start stretching in the morning and you always are a coffee drinker like me, like you stretch with your coffee, so I feel like it gives really powerful things you can do to move your behavior toward the outcomes that you want, but it's very clear and very simple. So I love Atomic Habits.
I love that book too. One of my faves. Okay, number 5. What's a go-to motivational quote you love? Tiny. Oh.
So I think that when you do big projects, like our students do if they're taking the IB diploma program, or if you're teaching the AP capstone, or if you're learning a new language and you just move to a new country, that's a big project, right? And so I think sometimes we can get overwhelmed when we look at the final product. But if we think about, this is actually a quote that I say a lot. So I put my own motivational quote. Tiny steps still move you forward. And we talk a lot about in my classroom about shrinking the start. Like, what's the smallest thing you can do to move yourself forward? Because a lot of the students in my class actually struggle with perfectionism and anxiety. So it's, a good problem in quotes, and that I don't have to be motivating them all the time to do something, but sometimes they get analysis paralysis and they don't know where to start. And so tiny steps still move you forward.
I am definitely one of those students, or I was one of those students.
You became one of those teachers.
Okay, one that I skipped. Question number 4. If you were to give one piece of advice to yourself as a first-year teacher, what would it be?
So I really struggle with this because I never want people to feel badly about what they have to do to get through their teaching day, because I saw some kind of quote that was like, we might all be in the same storm, but we're not in the same vessel. So if you're in a teaching season where you are having to take work home because maybe it's a big grading season, like what I'm about to say is not to make you feel bad about it, right? But what I am going to say is that if you want to be in education for more than 5 years, you have to cap it at some point. So personally, I try, even though I'm teaching, like courses with, heavy grading loads and things like that, like I think we all are, I try really hard to leave work at work. So sometimes I would rather stay a little bit later or get there a little earlier. My brain works better in the mornings. That's something we'll talk about on later episodes, right? Noticing your energy and how your brain can work best. But I try, you have to compartmentalize, because otherwise this is a profession like other helping professions that the work never ends. There is no end. There is no end to the work. So I attended my first training, and it's such a beautiful full circle moment, because I'm with that same trainer right now in training for history workshop leaders. And I remember he said, I just want you to know you can't teach all the content required in this course. It's not impossible. It's impossible. There's not enough hours in the day. And in the moment, you're like, what? And this guy was literally the guy who wrote the textbook that we were using in my class, and so I was like, I guess I'm allowed to say his name because he wrote the textbook. So I'll share you guys. It was David Smith. He was wrote the Oxford history textbook. And I at first was just so flabbergasted by that. But then later I was like, oh, right. Because it's never ending. So having a system that works for you, so that we're not also beating ourselves up, right? Like, oh, why am I working so hard? to compartmentalize it. It has to, the day has to end at some point. So that was a very long-winded answer, but
good advice. Okay, and last, finally, we loop back to a metacognition question. When you get some of your aha moments, what are you usually doing? What is one condition or action you would say tends to spark your best thinking?
let me have a little think. Let me have a little think. So I like what you said about movement, Dr. Jillian, really resonates with me too. So if I'm feeling stuck in any way, shape, or form, personal, professional, anything, I'm gonna walk it out. Like, and we like to have walking meetings. Like when I'm in movement and when I'm walking, I feel like it's like, okay. And I know you're asking me the questions, but I would turn that one around to you because you got to share too. Like, when do you get some of your like, that works? Like, when do you get some of those, your aha moments? What are you usually doing?
I would say for me, it's usually when I've gotten into some kind of flow mode with research rabbit holes and information gathering and kind of like that voracious, like learn mode. And then when I stop and step away and have time to kind of reflect, and it's oftentimes like when I'm doing something very routine, like driving in my car or getting dressed, things like that. So just having space between the learn, and think intentionally, and then some time to reflect, and then doing something just routine. That's usually my best aha moments.
That's so cool. And I think the goal of also closing with this question, team, is that you could reflect, like you might have a similar experience. Maybe for you, it's driving. Maybe it's, I call that, Dr. Jillian and I both have done some research together too. So it's like, okay, you know what, we're going to let this sit. And again, all my metaphors are coffee, right? And I call it percolating, like when it's drip, 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 and maybe, or steeping time if you're a tea drinker, like where you just step away for a second. And that's when your brain makes all those neural connections, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, what? So thinking about like how you could make those spaces for your students too, right? So if nobody says about their aha moment was like sitting at a desk in a time standardized test, right? Like nobody says that. That's never a thing, right? So, okay, well, Dr. Jillian, do we have any more rapid fire questions, or is that our set for today?
That is the end of our rapid fire round.
All right, team. Well, that's the Metacognition show for today. So, as I said, think about some action or takeaway. Remember, tiny steps still move you forward. So, anything from this episode that got you thinking that you could just give it a go in your context tomorrow. So, have a think, give you 2 seconds of percolating time. You got it? Awesome. Okay, well, you're going to share that with us. And don't forget to tune in next time.
That's our show, team. Thanks for listening, and thanks for all you do for your staff, students, and crew. Be sure to follow the show for future conversations and share this episode with someone else who values deep thinking.